Today we're looking back 50 years to VE Day, at how it was celebrated in the countryside and how the war changed forever life in rural Britain. Well, during those long years of conflict, people even in the remotest of areas could keep in touch with events through the wireless. But it meant a trek, and often a long one, to the nearest big village or town that had a cinema to see the war in moving pictures. Much of what they saw alongside the big features was in the form of newsreels and government information films. But one rural cinema in Leicestershire showed films about how country folk in the area were coping. They were the work of Frank Attfield, a local farmer and film buff who took his cine camera with him everywhere. Frank's films were a great hit. These are the shots Frank Attfield took of the cinema that showed his films, the Ritz in Lutterworth, which was run by an old friend. Like hundreds of others, it's no longer a cinema. Some years ago, it was turned into a Masonic hall. Frank Attfield himself died in a car crash soon after the war while still a young man, but he probably still recognised parts of Lutterworth, and he'd certainly know his home village of Ashby Magna, where many of his films were made, in between working on Manor Farm. For all his life, Frank had been a true countryman, and his films became an affectionate record of an era, of rural Leicestershire in times of peace and war. He was a much-loved man who made a great impression on everybody that he met, especially his young nephew, David Attfield, who followed the family footsteps and runs Manor Farm today.
There were two loves in Uncle Frank's life. One was his filming, and his other love was farming, which he farmed a mixed farm of 200 acres with his brother William. And then, of course, the farm being farmed in those days by horses.
Frank Attfield's camera depicted the hard grind in the fields as he and everyone else in agriculture toiled to feed an isolated nation. When pictures like this were shown at the Ritz in Lutterworth, it reminded the audience of the role that they were playing in the pursuit of victory. And when victory came, the people that Frank knew and filmed celebrated along with everyone else.
The atmosphere then was happiness, relief. Everybody's faces were smiles, windows were open, lights went on everywhere. Everyone was shouting from end to end of the street, "Hello, Mrs. So-and-so, isn't it wonderful?" Everybody was so happy, the children were running around. We had a lovely victory parade, everyone dressed up, all the houses were decorated, streamers across the streets, street parties in every street in Lutterworth. And we had one character in Lutterworth that always dressed up as a lady, John Wheeler. He was a real old character.
Frank Attfield's camera whirred away as Lutterworth let its hair down and celebrated VE Day. Leading the parade was a local village bobby.
I mean, you got to look at that picture, ain't you? Oh, it's a smart fella, good looking. But I'll tell you, if a band strikes up, I start whistling. I was thoroughly enjoying it. I was boss, you know. I was boss of the parade, you know. I don't know. I can't tell you, really.
Frank captured the gaiety of the nation, the happiness brought by peace in Europe, with no inkling yet of the hard times still to come. But throughout the war, Frank Attfield had shown the cinema-goers of Lutterworth what was happening locally on the home front. And presumably pictures of bayonet practice for the Home Guard didn't have to pass the censor.
There was a post that was manned near North Kill with sticks, that was manned all night in case of paratroopers dropping in, etc. But I'm afraid it was a token manning more than an actual manning. The Colonel Belgrave, who was in charge, used to come round and inspect about 10 o'clock at night, and after that you were pretty well on your own, and there was a certain amount of snares set and rabbits caught, because it was a squire's land round Kilworth-Sticks, and it was an opportunity that wasn't to be missed when rabbits were in great demand. Of course, I didn't do anything, it was the others, of course.
Bereavement was also covered by Frank and his camera as one small town honoured its fallen sons.
Dear Mrs. Knight, it is with great regret that I have to inform you of your son's death in action on April the 3rd. He was a grand lad.
Peter Knight lost his brother just weeks before the end of the war in Europe, and reading again that letter from his brother's captain summons vivid impressions of spring 1945.
50 years on, VE Day still brings mixed emotions of relief and sadness, not only for me and my memories, but for those others who lost people in the war. Relief for those that were reunited and the fact that killing had ended.
Throughout the war, and for shortly afterwards, Frank Attfield's unique eye on the countryside followed the changes that were taking place in agriculture and in small market towns like Lutterworth. He had one of the first of the tractors that were to revolutionise farming, and of course he proudly filmed it and showed it at the cinema.
The war changed Lutterworth in that it changed from an agricultural town to a manufacturing town. And so sadly, when the head of a family who made baskets went, so went the baskets, so went the saddler and the blacksmith and the wagon maker. And it was very sad to think that happened under our noses, and we really hadn't been prepared for it. Do you know what I mean?
And the night they put the lights out for the blackout, Lutterworth to me was never the same when the lights came back on, because as I say, a lot of my friends, mates, some never came back. Some came back and then went, they're abroad, New Zealand, Australia, Canada. And the atmosphere had gone, the old Lutterworth atmosphere had gone.
Frank Attfield's pictures are more than just history. They help people like his nephew David, only a boy in this parade, remember their childhood.
I can look up the fields there. I can say, right, that's the first time I drove the Fordson tractor in the spinney field at a certain spot. That's the field I cross-ploughed when I first started cross-ploughing, the first night I left school. I think that Uncle Frank had an insight into farming in the future with taking these films of what farming was going to become like.
The wagon that Frank filmed is still there in the orchard at Manor Farm. It's gradually rotting away, but his movies, first seen by the wartime cinema-goers of Lutterworth, will forever recall ordinary country folk in extraordinary times.